This is the Ben Mulroney Show, but when we do This Week in Politics, I share the mic with people far smarter than I. Please welcome back to the show, Warren Kinsella and Chris Chapin. Chris, all right, this show, it doesn't air at the same time everywhere across the country, and so in a lot of places, this will be airing after people hear the Mark Carney big announcement. That apparently the very big press conference is coming. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to sound really smart and predict what he's going to say.
Well, listen, I think, Ben, the prime minister's spent a lot of time leading up to this announcement and foreshadowing it for some time. And I think, he's certainly been critical about that. He's been criticized about that. There's been a lot of question about what's taken the prime minister so long to demonstrate to Canadians what his plan for the Canadian economy is. And so I think we're going to see, a very strong direction about, huge billion-dollar investments, whether that's, the radar system that clearly was something that's been used and been ideally used to broker a deal with President Trump.
Yeah.
Or some of the larger projects that I suspect we'll hear more and more of in the coming days, whether that's the expansion of the Port of Churchill and getting liquefied natural gas to markets in Europe. I think the big question I have when it comes to Prime Minister Carney and the federal Liberal government is, can they actually get this done? Because, this is a tall task. This is a tall order. And we've heard talks from the federal Liberals about big projects for a very long time. I'm still waiting to take a high-speed rail train to Montreal, and get to Montreal for dinner and back in an hour.
Yeah.
I'm just not sure when that's ever going to happen.
I suspect that Mark Carney is going to be a prime minister who differentiates himself from that sort of performative nonsense. And I have no doubt that at some point we're going to get some real meat on the bone, and that could be today.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, what we're all hearing the rumors that this is going to be at the level of the type of budget that Chrétien and Martin had, that I was involved with as a staffer 31 years ago, the historic budget that saw enormous cutbacks in the federal government at the staffing level, at the programming level, Canadian Forces bases, you name it. It was a big, big change in the way Canada's books were run. So we're hearing the same sort of stories coming out of Ottawa and coming out of PMO.
Yeah.
The big problem I think that Carney has still got is, the mandate he received in the election was for sure to deal with the red ink and to get Canada back into the black and to be more of a progressive conservative. And he's been that, with carbon tax and capital gains and defense spending and so on.
Yeah.
The problem is on the fundamental issue in the election campaign, Pierre Poilievre being elbows down and Mark Carney being elbows up. Mark Carney has put his elbows down. That's his own phrase. It's now coming back. But
Warren, doesn't that take a backseat if in this announcement we have the getting rid of the EV mandate, and we hear about some of these big projects of national importance, and we hear about a pipeline, and we hear about, like we said, a Port of Churchill, and we hear maybe we hear about the tanker ban being tweaked in one way or another. I mean, if those things happen, those are the things that we have said as a nation, not just one side of the political spectrum or the other. As a nation, these are the things we need to get the country moving, whether or not Donald Trump is a good or bad actor. These are the things we got to take care of what's happening at home. And I think he'll get a lot of credit if he does those things.
No, I don't think it takes a back seat. It doesn't. It doesn't.
Okay.
It is the fundamental issue from the election campaign, and it's starting to show up in public opinion polling. Abacus last week showing the Tories ahead, not by a lot, but ahead for the first time in months. Now, Angus Reid this morning showing the Tories ahead. Now, Pierre Poilievre continues to be baggage for them and is probably dragging them down. But the main reason why the Conservative Party is now ahead of the Liberal Party for the first time in many months is because people feel that he flip-flopped on the key promise he made. So all these other things, yes, for sure, they can work for you on a regional basis. But in terms of the macro, in terms of the national question, did he do what he said he was going to do? No, he didn't. And that's why he's paying a price now in the polls.
Chris, this is a story that we didn't send you, but I'm sure you have an opinion on this. You know, we talk on this show and on talk radio stations across this country about what feels like an increase in violent crime and citizens not feeling as safe as they once did. That was something that Pierre Poilievre, that was a drum that he beat incessantly in the last election campaign. And I've heard people say that if he wants to take one issue away from the Liberals, it could be domestic security, like at-home security. And he does seem to be right on a lot of these things. Can the Liberals wrest control of that with some changes to bail reform and criminal justice reform?
I think they can, Ben. I think it comes back to the same points I raised, a couple minutes ago about what's taking them so long. I think you look at what Prime Minister Carney said right after he was first elected. He said, I'm going to touch bail reform, and told the premiers, I'm going to touch bail reform in the fall. And then we've had a summer ripe with, you can't go a day of the news without hearing some home invasion, some violent carjacking, things we were never used to hearing in this country. And I think he's ceded that ground to the Conservatives, who've always been stronger on, law and order issues. But there's a lot of people now publicly calling for things like castle law and being able to protect your house. I think there's a lot of people who are fed up with hearing the police say, "Oh, just comply with the burglars." And so there would have to be quite the about face. Now, to Warren's point, I think we've seen so far Mark Carney be quite willing to lean to the right, whether it is, abandoning the carbon tax or abandoning the capital gains tax. But that's a big question for his party and the coalition he's built. Is would he look at doing something like, bringing back Harper's, minimum sentencing laws? Would he look at something like real strict bail reform that, many in his party believes impedes on, violent offenders' charter rights? And so could he grapple that ground back from the Conservatives? Of course, they're the government. That's the perks of being in power. I think it comes down to, do they have the will to? I think they might just get forced into considering how they do that, because I think that's one of the key issues. Like Warren said, we're seeing, the Tories pop back up in the polls. Public safety is going to be among the top issues moving forward if the federal government doesn't do something.
Warren, it's going to be a kitchen table issue, right? It's that thing that it's going to affect everybody. And not for nothing, the Liberals typically do very well in cities, and the cities are the places that are being affected most by this. I'm not going to call it a crime wave, but this increase in crime.
I represent a family who was targeted with a shooting by a 12-year-old. The 12-year-old was out on bail when it happened, allegedly, and then is let out on bail again a couple days ago. So, the perception in big cities across the country is crime's out of control. But the problem for the Liberals is, as Chris says, Tories are seen as better on law and order. Liberals are seen as better on healthcare. So how Carney squares that circle, it'll be interesting to see.
The former premier of Quebec, Jean Charest, said that, 20 years from now, we may be thanking Donald Trump for holding up a mirror to this country and saying, you can do better. So I ask you, 20 years from now, is there anything you're going to thank Donald Trump for?
I'm trying to think of something nice. And by the way, I'm not smarter, and you're smarter than anybody. I honestly, I guess I think what Charest was reaching for, when I read the headline, I was like, what the hell is he going on about? Because obviously Donald Trump has been a disaster for the world in terms of tariffs and favoring Russia over Ukraine and meddling in the private sector, and just his appalling personal record. He's been the worst president ever, I think, to guys like me. But there is some truth to what Mr. Charest says, which is, it was wonderful. It was upsetting, but it was wonderful to see this country come together. Right, left, east, west, north, south, old, young. People came together as a country, and we're still seeing it. People are not taking vacations in the United States. People are buying Canadian. Those are all good things. So I think, in a sense, yes, we're grateful for Trump stirring up that kind of patriotic fervor, but overall, he's been pretty bad for the world, and he's been pretty bad for Canada.
And I take all those points, and I think you're right on a lot of them, but significantly, like I stopped my car when I heard the announcement that Mark Carney said where he was going to bump the pay of every member of the military and veteran by 20%, like I stopped the car because it made me proud. And I couldn't remember the last time I felt proud of a government the way they were treating our military. And I took stock of it in that moment. I was like, this is a new feeling. I don't think that we would be anywhere close to that position by any government, liberal or conservative, were it not for the pressure that Donald Trump has been putting on the allies of the United States. I'm not saying he's a good dude. I'm just saying on this one thing, Chris, you gotta recognize where the genesis was.
Yeah, I listen, I don't take anything Warren said for granted, because I think he's right about the personal conduct of the president and what he's done around the globe just for his own amusement. But I've said this on this program and others for months now. We would not be accomplishing what we're doing. I would call this one heck of a shot in the arm, a wake-up call for our country that was very blasé for far too long. Our economy hasn't grown the way it should have for decades now. We left natural resources in the ground. We didn't build big infrastructure projects. We underfunded our military. And there's only one reason any of that's changing, and his name is Donald Trump. Like, we are investing, our share of GDP that we always promised to into our military to meet our NATO, requirements, simply because of Donald Trump. We're talking about an NDP premier opening up the port of Churchill for liquefied natural gas because of Donald Trump. We're talking about the idea of pipelines from the East Coast to the West Coast because of Donald Trump. And so, whether it's interprovincial trade barriers that are being broken down by the premiers, none of this was happening 6 months ago.
Yeah.
I guess at this point it seems like a blur. None of this was happening 9 months ago.
Yeah.
And he really did, send a wake-up call to this country. And so I think I get what Jean Charest was getting at. There is very good chance, if in fact we fulfill all these promises that we're out talking about.
All right. Well, one sticking point, one problem that is sticking in the craw of so many people out west is the issue with canola and the issue with the tariffs, different tariffs, Chinese tariffs, right? And the Globe and Mail seems to believe that the auto sector benefits outweigh the canola industry. And if they're saying if you're going to pick between Ontario and Saskatchewan, they're picking Saskatchewan. They're picking Ontario. And Warren, I got to think, like, I'm looking at the situation with these tariffs. On one hand, you have a very real industry in Canada that is being affected, and on the other, just tell them I'll call them back. On one hand, you got a very real industry in Canada that is affected, and we're tariffing a product that doesn't even exist in Canada, these Chinese EVs. And I think there's room for both canola and the automotive industry, but I really think at some point Mark Carney needs to pay very close attention to what's happening in Saskatchewan.
Yeah, for sure. And it's our canola is a big deal in Western Canada and to this country. Why is this happening? The Chinese are mad at us, very mad at us, for setting up a wall, an import wall for their EV giant. They are the giant, not Elon Musk. The Chinese are the giant globally in the production of electric vehicles, and we've made it difficult for a lot of good reasons for them to get their vehicles sold and driven in Canada. So that's what the canola fight is all about. The Chinese are taking a page from Donald Trump's book. They're using thuggery and bullying tactics in order to get what they want at the trade level. And then that's not entirely new. It's just the degree of it, just where countries like Canada, who have been, good operators and been fair people to deal with, are being treated unfairly. And this is an example of that.
And Chris, look, I understand why we had to do what we did on EVs. There may be a way to tweak that policy, but if we had a problem with Huawei a few years ago, then of course we're going to have a problem with Huawei on wheels, right? With cameras and sending data back over the internet, over the air, to the Chinese Communist Party. I get it, but it seems like in order to protect Ontario, Saskatchewan's paying the price. And if I'm the people in Saskatchewan, I'm like, what the hell did I do? I don't have a dog in this fight.
Well, no, it's exactly that, Ben. And, for business, I spend a lot of time out in Regina and in Saskatchewan. They make fun of me as the Torontoite coming out as the Laurentian elite, and that I don't understand their problems. And I think when you read stories like this, you understand why they have a certain level of animosity towards, Ontario and Quebec and Eastern Canada, is because of stories like this, trying to pretend that canola doesn't matter. Canola is such a massive industry for Canada's economy. But electorally, the prairies don't exactly pack the same punch that Ontario or Quebec or British Columbia do. And so we do favor industries. That said, I think there's room for, the federal government specifically to protect both industries. And I think that's, we can't play one against the other, because, as much as we're elbows up or elbows down, the last thing we need to do is have our own internal divisions continue to grow. And so I think, the Chinese knew exactly what they were doing targeting canola. The Chinese government is brilliant in terms of the way they, split apart allies. And I think that's exactly what they're trying to do here, knowing that, a tariff on canola is something that will divide Canadians between East and West.
All right, gentlemen, we are going to leave it there. So Chris Chapin, Warren Kinsella, thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Thanks so much for watching the show. Now, if you enjoyed what you saw, hit that subscribe button so you never miss another episode of The Ben Mulroney Show.